Johnson. Good. We want to record this. The mother of the modern environmental justice movement. And so we're really excited to talk to you not only about the show, but the themes and the larger work of the environmental justice movement, and particularly the work of PCR, People for Community Recovery, based in Altgeld Gardens in Chicago.
So we're going to start just by giving a little background on what the project is, how we came to it, and we also have the opportunity to hear some pieces of the show and use those as jumping off points in our conversation. So throughout, we're going to be playing some clips. The other thing is, as questions come up for you or thoughts or resonances, we invite you to please throw those in the chat as they come up. We probably will respond to questions and thoughts at the end, but please don't hold them back. Throw them in the chat.
Get it out while it's fresh.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, oh, what was that question that I had? And then I never got answered. So throw that in there. But yeah, just to give a little backdrop. So outside of the context of just this show, Damon and I have been hosting and producing movement media based in Chicago for 9 years now. From our flagship show called Ergo, which are long-form conversations with artists and movement workers, to a range of shows in different topics, supporting in response to and in contribution to different liberatory social movements, kind of across the ecosystem of what that means. And the way that we came to this project was really from a point of curiosity and inquiry. We were doing some other work related to environmental justice, which, both of us had a kind of working understanding of, but wasn't our entry point. And we, as we like to do, wanted to have a deeper understanding of the lineages that the work that was happening today was coming out of. So, if we knew contemporary EJ workers, who do they see themselves in the lineage of? And so Hazel's name kept coming up, and we did what we tend to do, which is we went to go look for the documentary about her. To try to get a sense of the story. And, we found news clips here and there, or, a few articles, but there wasn't really a deep telling in a media sense of the life and then disparate legacies of someone who, for the people that we were talking to who were leading this work, they cited as like, this is who I'm doing this in the continuation of. And so we were lucky enough to be connected with Cheryl, who we knew we couldn't even start to think about how to develop and tell this story without her. One, just from on a base level, like the permission to take on that story, but also in the way that we do our work, it's much less about like, how do we capture someone's story and experience and then turn it into something else, and more about how do we make something together that's in contribution to the work that's currently happening. And so, Cheryl, we're going to turn it over to you in 1 second, but I think we could start with actually our first clip from the first time we ever sat down on microphone together. And we start with the same two-part question that we start every interview we do with, no matter what we're talking about, we always start with the same two-part question. And that question is, in this time, however you define time, this hour, this day, this season, this lifetime, how is the world treating you? And how are you treating the world? And so we asked Cheryl that back in November of 2021. And here's what she had to say. And just give me a thumbs up once it starts playing if you can hear it. I think we can start with the same question that we start all of our interviews with. And it's a two-part question. And the question is, in this time, and define time however you will, this hour, this moment, this season, this lifetime, how is the world treating you, and how are you treating the world?
How the world treating me and how I'm treating the world. Well, I start with how I'm treating the world. I'm a type of person that people gravitate to. I'm a caring person. I have sympathy. I can understand. I connect with people. Even dogs in my neighborhood love me. I know my neighbor dog's name. I enjoy myself, There'll be some ups and downs, and sometimes I get lonely because I come from a large family. I come from a family of 9. There's only 2 of us left, me and my baby sister. We was a very close-knitted family. So life is good and challenging. I just hate the fact that, we got to deal with a lot of the implicit bias, prejudice, institutional racism, and the whole misconception that I'm trying to demystify is about the life of people live in public housing. Now, how I see the world, I only could relate it to the work that I do. Today, it's rewarding. It's almost like I tell people I can breathe now. At one point, I was always angry in this movement because, people took us for granted. They didn't believe that environmental justice was a real thing and environmental racism happened. And the fact that our community was always targeted to be harmed. I've been involved with the organization for 40 years, but I've been working here for 36 years. And to see the trials and the tribulation that my mother went through 40 years ago and the abuse that she had to endure with it, but it didn't stop her. I just wish she was here to see that the work that she has done over the years is getting the recognition that it should.
So first, we encourage folks, as we're about to bring Cheryl up, we encourage folks to just reflect on that question for yourself. So whether you got a journal with you or you can use it in your practices moving forward, coming out of this session, just ask yourself that question: how is the world treating you, and how are you treating the world? And now it's our honor and pleasure to bring up Cheryl Johnson. I really want to emphasize, as we began making this project, it was important to build a relationship and a partnership with Cheryl because she is Hazel's daughter, but she's so much more than just being Hazel's daughter. She herself is a mother of the movement and is carrying on and embodying the legacy that her mother built, but also expanding it. And so in the ways that people talk about Hazel, we found that folks also lifted up Cheryl in the same way. And so upon meeting her, it's like, oh man, it is clear that not only is this a beautiful, powerful spirit, but she's also historically significant in her own right. So it's really been an honor to build this with her and to be in this journey with her. And so, Cheryl, I'm gonna bring you on in, and we want to kind of start with, and initially plugging in and helping us build this project. What came up for you? How did it feel to go on this journey? What were your first expectations? And what has kind of been the experience of telling this story in this format, in this like long form style for the archive?
Well, I have to say, I always say, I can't stand to listen to myself.
No human can.
I
And
did
I
see
was
you
like,
with the hands
I don't
over
know
your
if y'all
eyes.
saw me, but I was plugging my ears. It's just that, but going through this journey with you, I didn't realize it's been 3 years since, almost 3 years that we had that first conversation. A lot of things has happened in the last 3 years, and I'm glad to be on this journey with you guys because listening to it and the different pieces that you play give me a whole nother perspective as to what I said in the past. So having this kind of conversation, it brings out good memories for me and the challenges and how I continue to have to be optimistic for my community, despite everything that goes on around us. It's just so much negativity. But what I love about EJ movement, the environmental justice movement, is the fact that it embraces our challenges and it brings all different people together because we understand that commonality that we have as human beings, as human race, that we got to breathe the same air.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line. We got to eat the same food that comes, well, in America, only in America, that we may have to eat some modified food, but we eat the same, and we live on this land, and you know, and we drink water. You know, that's to exist. So that's the commonality that we. The diversion comes in is what the production of it, how the production of it, and how it gets manifested to something different, which can be harmful to many of us in our community. So, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that commonality that you're speaking to was something that you brought us back to time and time again in our conversations of like, yes, we're talking about a particular place, but what makes this impactful is how the needs and the wants are shared no matter where you are, and the impacts of environmental racism, the impacts of environmental degradation touch every space. You know, the degrees of that and how it's responded to might be different, but like there is nowhere that is outside of this work.
So let's actually jump in right to this point of that there is nowhere outside of this work, and this is a global struggle that all human beings and all life is connected to, but also this story, for those who haven't listened everywhere you get your podcast to help this garden grow, this story is very much rooted in a specific place, a specific space. It's not just a Chicago story, it's specifically an Altgeld garden story. So for those who've not yet listened to Help This Garden Grow, wherever you get your podcast,
We're gonna do that 30 to 40 times. So
can you tell folks about Altgeld Gardens and the powerful resilience that has made this movement so much stronger and has, you know, gone to the highest halls of power? Why is it significant that this story took place in Altgeld Gardens?
Oh, you asking me a question?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking that you finna go into another segment.
Another point.
Okay,
No,
I'm
we can
sorry.
talk to you. We will bounce it off what you gotta say.
You, repeat that question again.
sure. So, you know, this story goes all over the place. We go, you know, Hazel's work went national, international, you've moved through, but it's so rooted in place in the gardens. And so maybe let's just start with like, for people who don't know, you know, this is a history of a person and an organization, but really it's a history of that land. What do people need to know about the space, the land that Altgeld Gardens sits on to even begin to understand this story?
You know, it's we have a historical significance in this area, and it goes back to even the native, you know, the indigenous people who lived on this land before they ever built Altgeld Gardens. You know, it's been an area where you can feed, you know, you can grow gardens. You know, way before it was built, there was farms in this area. It's almost like a rural area, but because of our history in this area, dating back all the way back to Harriet Tubman, you know, the whole Underground Railroad that sits right off the bank of the Little Calumet River, right behind my neighborhood. It has a strong, significant value. Some of you know, the people, you know, that lived out here for, like me, for many, many years. And I would just question myself, and I mean, having a conversation with folks, you know, the other day, and I lived out here all my life. I never lived anywhere else. Monday, I'll be 63 years old.
Hey, this is really just a birthday party, early
And the
birthday.
next following Monday, the 18th, my mother moved in Altgeld Gardens in 1962. So, you know, I'd be 63, but I've been living in this one neighborhood for 62 years. And then as I was thinking, the pros and cons about leaving this community to staying in this community, and I don't think I can leave because of what the significance and the value and the open space, and the most important, the social equity in my community has always been high, but we don't give value to it. Mm. You know, you know, my neighborhood, my neighbors, I know everyone that lives next door to me, down the street, you know, and it's important. And I see that the folks really love me and I love my neighbors. You know, it's ironic that you can go outside this neighborhood and walk past somebody and don't say hi. How you doing? But in my community, we speak to everybody,
Mm.
you know? So those social values, like I don't have to worry about someone stealing my package when I come home. My package is either there or one of my neighbors got it.
Mm.
And depending on who has my number, they call, you know? So it's just, we don't value those things. And I tell people, when I had my kids, when I raised my kids out here, I never had to pay for a babysitter. It just wasn't, it didn't have that cost factor, you know, and if I couldn't, me and my mother couldn't be back home in time to get them from that school program, I could call any one of my friends and neighbors. And most importantly, my friends are still my friends today that I grew up with, and we still call each other.
Mm.
So Black folks have a lot of social equity that we don't give value to. We tend to look at economic opportunities that was not given to us, you know, but Altgeld has always been like a self-contained neighborhood. We had, when I was growing up out here, we didn't really have to go outside our neighborhood to buy anything. We just did it just to go out, you know, just to go outside of your neighborhood. But in the late 70s, early 80s, you saw a drastic change in public housing. I never knew I lived in a project until the 80s. You know, and many people had the opportunity to prepare themselves to leave here and go purchase a home. Many of the people that lived in Altgeld moved next door when they completely finished the Golden Gates. They bought homes over there, you know, and then if you didn't want to live here, they built Concordia, they built Eaton Green. So it's people that still just live in this isolated area. But the value of the social equity in my community is something that I just can't just walk away from. You know, who would my next neighbor be?
Mm. Yeah,
You
that,
know, will it be the same? And it will never be the same because my history and my community, the values that I learned, it comes straight from this neighborhood, and we're a caring neighborhood. We care about each other.
mm. That's beautiful, and it's so evident also that care ethic runs throughout the conversations we had, and really is like, we can talk about all the different methodologies that Hazel employed, the things that have stayed and been passed on, but really what's at the center of it is this caring inquiry about what's happening to the people around her, you know?
Right, I grew up in that. You know, I never knew my mother not to be involved in our neighborhood, doing things for youth. I grew up in that, you know, and many other people in my community grew up with their parents being active and involved in the community. And some of the people is also showing those traits. So my kids is active. And one is indirect and one is directly active. You know,
Mm.
I don't know if it's a male or female hormone, but my son, you know, he'll come around one day. You know, but he'll be supportive. But outside of that, you know, so you know, great people came. We have doctors, lawyers, politicians. Gus Savage, a lot of people don't even know Gus Savage grew up out here in Block 15. You know, we have athletes that, you know, we had the Durham hair product that made the first cold, what they call a cold wave for Black folks. This is called, and his mother was my godmother. In fact, his baby sister is still my best friend today, and we are celebrating our birthday together on the 13th, you know, so.
Happy birthday to her too.
And it's funny that she always state, we've been friends in the beginning of the womb. that's how close and long that we've been knowing each other. So it's you know, those memories that we have in our community is steady every year. We come back together the third Sunday of every August and have our annual picnic, and there'd be thousands of folks.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And that connectedness, I think, speaks to some of the uniqueness of the design of Altgeld Gardens, but also why PCR and the movement has been able to sustain for so many decades in this space, because there is this closeness that, like, you know, whenever we're there, we can see, and that is at the forefront. Like, before you start talking about PCBs or landfills, whenever you talk about this community, the first thing you name is this closeness and this intergenerational network of care. And so for folks who, again, are maybe not from Chicago or not as familiar, Altgeld Gardens is in the city. It's on the southeast side of Chicago, down what is known as the Bishop Ford Highway. It is isolated from the rest of the city in terms of public transportation, particularly the Red Line, which runs north and south in the city, stops at 95th Street, and the exit for Altgeld Gardens is 130th. So that's a few miles of isolation. But it was built in a post-World War II context for Black GI veterans. And so it's an enclosed community, and in many ways was idyllic or seen as like a step up for folks. But what was soon learned and uncovered, and what Hazel's inquiry really brought to the world, to the White House, to the City Hall, and to the neighbors, was an understanding that the environment, you know, the literal conditions that this beautiful community was built on and was placed on due to segregation, which also needs to be named, was built on top of and surrounded by dozens of landfills, by water treatment facilities, Altgeld Gardens, A-L-T-E, yeah, Daniel's typing it in. And so this community that we're naming, that, you know, where Cheryl leaves her package on the front door, but we're not gonna tell y'all which steps it is.
See you lurking over there.
Package hunters in this session.
Oh no! Hey, if you come around here and tamper with any packages around here and you're not known, you're not getting away with it.
So watch out.
Somebody is watching. Somebody's gonna stop you and say, "Oh no,
Yeah.
you can't be
But
taking our packages," you know, because that's out, you know. But no, you can't do that.
But what it was built on, to your point, Dame, this idyllic community was built surrounded by, on top of landfill. Chicago Housing Authority was well aware of that and the environmental impact of that. And that was where they chose to locate this community, at first for Black veterans, and then as a result of segregation, as a de facto Black community, one of the few sustained, idyllic, spacious, green public housing developments. That's where they place it. And so that type of inquiry, and then figuring out what do we do about that, how do we get the more information, is really what rooted Hazel's work in that space. And so, Cheryl, to something you said earlier, we're going to play a second clip that I think shows the way both you and Hazel really hold that, like, commitment, deep love, and care for maybe above all else this community as the center point of the work. So we're going to play that clip now.
Living in your own shoebox is better than living in anybody else's mansion. But you have to take care of your own shoebox so you could continue to live in it. She said, but I know I may not do it in my lifetime, but at least she's setting the ground for it to continue. Oh, how she should say this? She used to say, how can I fight something and I don't know what's going on? But if I'm here, I can fight the problem. I know what's going on. And that's the reason why I stay here, because I like to fight for my rights.
All right, now it's time for us to help this garden grow.
Just a little extra call to action there. But I think that rootedness and that commitment to, like, if I'm not here, I won't know what's happening and how to best, because that information doesn't come from an accreditation or some university study. That comes from talking to my neighbors, seeing what happens, you know, seeing whether it's the cancer rates or other skin infections or the detrimental effects of all of this environmental degradation. Like, that knowledge exists in the people that live there, even if that information isn't presented, you know, to formal bodies that can, like, accredit that information. And that's a lot of what came through in the project, and what I think really connects it to other climate justice work as well as food justice work is this idea of, very often when community members in an affected area are brought in, there's this idea of like, give a testimonial to the degradation and to the effects and the harm happening. And we'll take that information, we being urban planners, policymakers, accredited experts, will take that story, that testimonial of harm, and we'll use that to inform us coming up with the solution. And I think what Hazel represents for many people is a sense of like, no, and what really, Cheryl, I think you've taken from her experience is like, no, we're not just here to tell the story of how like harmful this has been. We're here to have a real hand in shaping what these solutions are. It doesn't mean that we don't need help. It doesn't mean that this shouldn't be collaborative. But like, we're not just here to give the testimonial. We're here to have a hand in shaping what the solutions can be and what repair can look like. And so I'm wondering for you, where have been the instances where that's gone really well, and where have been the instances where like that requirement of, hey, we're not just here to talk about the harm, but we're here to also shape the solutions. How has that been received over time?
Well, here in the Chicago and in the state of Illinois, and when I talk about systemic institutional racisms and policies, that's what affects our community all the time. And today, through the hard work and dedication of many of the EJ groups in Chicago and in the state, has made policy change. We had one significant demonstration is the General Iron. We filed a complaint with HUD, and they came back and cited, yes, the move of a scrap iron from Lincoln Park to the south side of Chicago was racially motivated and was environmental racism. Now the city of Chicago has to, and it got a lot to do with zoning. It's these zoning problems that we have. And now the city is coming up with cumulative impacts assessments and tools that they have to use in the permitting process with facilities, because that's where the problem lies. See, it's unfortunately that we all have the assumption that government is here to protect us. Only selected communities only been protected by the government. We've been lied by the government when it comes to the siting of facilities in certain Black and Brown communities around the city and the state. So now, just last week, the Illinois Environment Protection Agency has agreed to put environmental justice in the review process for the permitting process. That is huge, because neither our city or our states has never denied industry any permits to operate, to build, or whatever. And many of these facilities has tremendous violation. I mean, just before General Iron moved from Lincoln Park, a couple months prior to that, they had an explosion there, but they still allowed them to operate and get the permits. But we're still fighting, for an example, the General Iron to get that last operating permit, so it's still in legal deliberation, but we hope that we come out victorious. We have bills. We have the Chicago, what is called a Chicago Affordable Bill Ordinance, to look at how we regulate any new buildings that's built in the city of Chicago must be electrified, because we know that we got these corroded pipes, and we know fossil fuel to create gas is not healthy for our environment, it's not healthy for our health. So just take it back 40 years when we started. These conversations, these things was not happening. And if you talk about it, you was labeled crazy, or you didn't know what you're talking about, or that this stuff have to go somewhere. Why not your neighborhood? to be told that directly by people who we vote for to protect us, to advocate on our behalf, you know? So to see today the embracement of this work that my mother told you that was gonna happen. Who says it's gonna be 70 degrees in February? I mean, March. And next week, on my birthday is always a catastrophe. Last time, a couple of years on my birthday, March 11th, we had snowstorms. Then the pandemic was declared on my birthday. You know, I'm like, something, you know, always. So I'm still waiting for it. I still got my boots right here on the side of me that I may have to put on my hat. Is in my possession in my purse. Gloves. You know, and here we are 60 and 70 degrees. And Hazel Johnson called it changing weather pattern 30 years ago because of what we do in this society that harms our earth. And here it is, you know, to see things she talked about decades ago and it's happening today, you know, she wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
So one for all the studious folks out here, the good students, I just want to walk you through the takeaways that we hope you get through this conversation. We have a few. One we already named is just being familiar with Hazel Johnson, her work, her method of this radical nurturing care that led to a mode of inquiry, right? So know Hazel Johnson. And then two, to follow her edict, or you know, the words that Cheryl leaves us with is take care of your own shoebox, right? So often when we think about environmentalism at large, but environmental justice specifically, questions or thoughts go first to the halls of power, right? Like, what is government doing? How do we get there? What's happening in universities? What studies need to happen? And what Hazel and Cheryl's story shows us is first you have to take care of and focus on your shoebox, wherever you are, your place, your home, your community. And in so doing, right, if you really care about what's happening there, that journey will then take you to the city halls and to the Springfields or the state capitals or to, you know, the university, or the university will come to you in a way that might be a little complicated, or all the way up to the federal government, right? And so I want to talk a little bit more about, you named that the EPA brought envisioning environmental justice into their program and into their
To
process.
reveal it in their
in their
permitting
decision
process.
making. And another thing that came out of, you know, that Hazel did not necessarily invent, but really championed in taking care of her shoebox was this notion of cumulative impact. Because the way that it seems that institutions demand information to be named is if there is a harm or if there is a downstream adverse impact, so whether that's illness, whether that's premature death, there will only be responsibility if we can name one singular isolated culprit, one chemical that's responsible, one factory or one agent that is then liable for lawsuits or for, you know, the ways in which the civil and legislative process works. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the importance of cumulative impact, because similarly to climate change or other things you name, was not taken seriously when Hazel was saying there are multiple forms of cancer, there are multiple respiratory and skin diseases happening in my community, and there are multiple pollutants and contaminants. We can't separate or isolate these things. These things are accumulating and happening all at once, while also there's these social political factors of deindustrialization, divestment from public resources and education, and so on and so forth. And so do we have a clip now, or should we give it some time?
I think let's
Yeah.
keep rolling.
Yeah, and so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the importance of a cumulative impact approach and the journey from it being marginalized or obscure and not taken seriously to now being very central in how we understand environmental justice at large.
Well, you know, because environmental justice is not a single source. You know, if you just think about it, I use this reference a lot to, like, EJ is like the umbrella. And what holds these umbrella up is the spokes within the umbrella. If any of those spokes, like it could be housing, education, health, food, transportation, all these different things that is part of our quality of life. If any of those spokes are broken, do we have a operating umbrella? No, because it's going to impact the next spoke in that umbrella, the next one, until it's no good. We're not there yet, but if we don't correct these measures, because it can be repaired. But if we don't repair it, then how long are we going to exist? I'm not talking, this might not be in either one of our lifetimes, but change is here. So we have to correct. We don't have the same technology and information and training that we had in 1860 when they first started doing industrial development in this area with George M. Pullman. But he knew how to make the railroad cars. And he created waste, but he didn't care about the waste. He just dumped it in the land where Altgeld Garden sits at right now today. But we didn't have that technology or that information as we have today about that type of process that, I call these chemicals baby chemicals because they never die, they just multiply under the ground, until we have a way that we can neutralize it or remove it, is the only answer that's going to cleanse itself. But I always remember, go back to what my mother said in the past. Mother Nature has a way of cleansing herself if we don't take care of her correctly. And we're seeing some of the things with, the change in the weather pattern, for an example. But when you look at the cumulative impact, you got contamination in your water, you got contamination in your in your air, you got contamination, and you living on it. You breathing it every day. And if your body do not recognize what we breathing every day, our body can't properly excrete it. So it stays in our body. It deposits in different organs in our bodies. So you cannot just look at a cumulative impact from a single source. You got to look at all the sources that make a negative impact on our health and the health of our community.
Yeah. And I think the way you just brought that to the body is really important. And also you naming this idea of like, what are the possibilities for repair that exist now that didn't exist or weren't in technological skills or even in people's imagination 50, 100 years ago. One of the things as we went through learning this story and having a deeper understanding of the relationship to the land was understanding the ways that limited food access and food apartheid play out in this space. You mentioned when you were young, it was a self-contained community, having access to a grocery store within the commercial strip known as Uptop. But then also the idea that people brought their own foodways with them when they moved in. Whether that was people having small gardens, whether that was, even when we were down there, we did a kayak trip on the little calumet right behind with open lands, and you can hear some of that in the show. And the whole time we're there,
help this garden grow anywhere you get your podcast.
my guys, episode 2. But the whole time that we're down there, there's people fishing in that water, right? And we had a really kind of moving conversation with you about how do we make sense of that, knowing that water is contaminated, knowing that water is poisonous, and knowing that this isn't inherently a recreation activity. This is a food source for people. And so I'm wondering, it's a broad question, but in thinking about food access and repair, right? Like before you can even get to growing your own food, if the soil is contaminated in ways that are incredibly detrimental, like that limits the options of what's possible. How do you see people's relationship with food in the gardens being a potential pathway toward like solutions for repair?
Well, as just like I said earlier in my lifetime in this community, we had gardens in our backyards. I remember people having their own apple tree because I was one of those folks that wouldn't pick your.
You remember that tree very well.
late at night, I'd go pick one of your apples off, And we had the beauty that's outside of Altgeld, that we have a lot of open land, and people just used to just navigate to the certain area in Maryland Manor and grow gardens, vegetable gardens. So it was, people grew a lot. I think the Rosebud Farm, as I can go far back, it was a store that sold a lot of poetry in our community. But they started off in a great shack. And I never forget, my father took me up there and to buy a chicken, but I didn't know he was buying a live chicken.
Yeah. That's a very
And I
different
actually
photo.
seen they chopped the chicken head off and it's running around. I never forget that in my lifetime. And then it fell and they picked it up. It just, I never forget that. I was about 5, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but that embedded in my head because I never, seen that before in my life. That was the first and the last time. And it's just ironic, that my kids grew up with a fish aquarium, and I took my son to a fish market, and I was trying to purchase a fish, and some catfish. My son said, "No, Mom." He was 3 years old. "Mom, no, Mommy, fish going tank. No, Mommy, fish going tank." We had to immediately leave, and I couldn't even buy the fish. And he didn't eat fish till he got in his 20s. As a result of that experience. I'm just saying how things are so connected.
Yeah.
And we know that the Little Calumet River is polluted, but we fought to get an alternative place for people that can fish at, and that's Flatfoot Lake. We organized, we pressured the federal government and the state to build a man-made lake in our area to have a substitute from people fishing in Little Calumet River. But it didn't even change that behavior because people still fish in the Little Calumet River.
Right.
They just do, and they use Flatfoot Lake also.
You mentioned, you use this as an example to name again that and then we organized and we changed realities and changed conditions. I want to talk a little bit more about the nature of that organizing contemporarily, but also through Hazel's life and work, because something that came up time and time again and makes sense, as you say, the issue is connected to everybody, is the importance of coalition. And so one, like Hazel is celebrated as the mother, but as the story goes, throughout the 70s and 80s, in Black communities around the country, we were seeing this innovative response to this environmental racism. And then that formulated in the early 1990s, and it went through the People of Color Environmental Justice Conference, that then really crystallized this movement as basically a national and global coalition. And then here in Chicago, whether it's through the Southeast Side or throughout the city at large, whether it's through How We Told the Show, Help This Garden Grow, wherever you get your podcasts, with our creative cabinet members, who, you named as folks who embody and live in the legacy of Hazel Johnson. So just in terms of organizing, I want to talk about the importance of coalition and environmental justice work, what that looked like for your mom, what that's looked like, as you have taken the reins over these last 10 to 15 years.
Well, you know what? Actually, I look at it more, it's more than just community organized. It's telling your story through live experiences.
Mm,
That's what inspired people to become organized.
Mm.
And I think my mother did that very well over the course of her time in doing this work, is that she had the ability to just to galvanize people in a space, talk about her life experiencing with not only the environmental issues and condition of her community, is how we all have a right to learn about the conditions and experiences in our own neighborhood, and is it having an impact on your health or not? And you have the right to begin to organize and challenge industry and government for your right to know about what is happening in your neighborhood and how, and if it's not good, they have a right to clean it up. Even though it took us 40 years to get where we at today, and we're really looking at ways to improve the community, but the people still not making that connection to environmental justice. Housing issue, for an example, is an environmental issue when you look at it from an infrastructure standpoint. The maintenance of it, the lead-based paint, the asbestos, the deterioration of it. Those are environmental conditions that happens, but our housing advocate doesn't connect it to environmental justice.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's still a whole lot of work that we have to do, because sometimes our people don't make that distinct connection unless you tell the story of your life experiences in this, what's happening in your community. But on the same token, you got to tell them that you have a right to breathe clean air, live in land that's not contaminated, and drink safety water, health water. I'm a lead advocate. I started off in PCR back in my career with it, is that I was an advocate about lead-based paints in the city of Chicago. But we knew that lead-based paints was hazardous, but also not only in our schools, but through our water lines, because we got leaded pipes. Nobody listened to us back in those days. Now today, they're talking about removing lead service line pipes. We knew that back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm.
And just to get laws to get, like, anytime you transfer property in the city of Chicago, you have to put a lead notice, let the people know if there's a potential environmental lead hazards in the transfer of those properties. And now you have to do environmental impact assessments now, before any property gets changed. So I say these things that, storytelling is the motivation tool that we need to continue to have to do it in order to organize our community, because our community is not, for the lack of a better word, we're not as organized as organized that we should be. You know what I mean? On these issues, because my mother used to always say, your health, no job means anything if it's having a negative impact on your health and your community. So I just say that organizing becomes the main tool, but in order to get that pre-tool, to get people motivated to that, is to tell your stories. Because we are personal, people are personal. We connect when you say that I learned that my breast milk had a lot of lead because I lived in a home that had a lot of environmental lead hazard. And I got passed down to my child. Now my child is disabled, has a learning disability as a result from the house that I lived in. Now, if you take it even farther than that, you talk about an industrial pollution. If you talk about the particular matters that being broken down from combustions, and we breathe it and it's coming out the smokestacks and it coming out, we don't look at those things and how it embeds in our body, and it can have a negative impact on it if your body don't know how to discrete it out.
Mm.
So this is about all of us. We have to make changes, but organizing is a tool that you use after you galvanize and inspire people. And that's what we was able to do, is inspire people around the country, but we have a hard time organizing people in our own neighborhood to stand up to fight for these environmental harms in our community. Do that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's something that we heard from you, but then also, Dave mentioned the creative cabinet. So just for a little context, in telling this story, we knew we couldn't do it alone, the two of us, and even the three of us. And so together with Cheryl, we built this creative cabinet of 5 contemporary environmental justice workers from different parts of the city, operating in different spaces. It was Juliana Pino from El Vejo, Tanisha Harris, who does policy work, Kyra Woods, who's worked with the city,
And
Adela, who's in the
I
chat, who
see.
works at PCR, and then Olga Bautista of the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And we heard what you just said repeated actually in many instances of like naming the harm is one entry point for people, right? Like, oh, this makes sense now, that brings people in, but it's the storytelling of like, here's what we did, here's what we were able to deeply understand in a new way, here's the change we're able to make, and that's what invites people in, whether they're directly affected or not. And then that cabinet, just on a personal level, was such an important piece of building this story, to be able to see like beyond the particulars of the gardens, like Hazel's impact, and in many ways, Cheryl, your impact across the city and beyond. And so we're actually going to play another clip, which is the different members of the cabinet speaking to some of that impact and where they see Hazel's legacy living in their work.
The way I see Hazel's impact in myself and the way that I approach the work and the world is to approach it from a place of relentless inquiry, to demand answers, to not only ask about the table where the decisions are made, but to question whether the table should exist. And it's about remembering where you're from and throwing down hard for the people you love. It's also about navigating the systems and figuring out the places in the systems where changes can be made to benefit the long-term possibilities for community well-being.
There are so many leaders across the city of Chicago, across the state, that also have similar experiences like Hazel did and see themselves now and are, in fact, leaders in their communities. We have seen Hazel's legacy turn up in schools, and now there's room and space for young people to not just be part of it, but to lead. For a long time, our region has been on the radar because of that grueling work that Hazel did. It is very far-reaching, just the impacts that she has had across the city, across the whole country.
It's a lot of Black women with a lot of loud voices in the community, and I just feel like they are respected and they are given those positions and those places in power because of what Hazel Johnson did. Like I said, laying those bricks is now the stepping stone that they're standing on now and adding to that history of Black women and Black independency.
I feel like for me to continue this legacy is to a closed mouth will not get fed, speak on what I need to speak on and help my community, because a lot of people is not going to say nothing, but it's only these few group of women is going to have their big old mouth where they going to hear us, where they can't do nothing but hear us. So I want to be that group of women with the big mouth.
I think Hazel Johnson laid the groundwork to make it easier for my community to receive me and the work that I do in environmental justice, assuming they even know I'm doing it. I am not famous. My path has been comparably easier because environmental justice is a known field. it has created traction to where you're having programs built around it. And the issues that plague communities like mine are so well known, but the term is also better well known, or at least you can define it to someone and they're like, oh, yeah, I know that happens to me. And so I hope that as I continue with the activism that I do and the work that I do, my community can feel a sense of pride in me, but also inspiration that they can do it too.
And so one thing I just want to name coming out of that clip that is not a coincidence, and then I want us to get into some calls to action and hopefully take a question or two. But we just heard the voice of, many women, and that is not unintentional or a coincidence. And so throughout, the history of this tradition that goes back centuries, but really as this movement has formalized itself over the last 40 years, it has been led and built in many ways by women, by Black women, by Black and brown women, by Black and Indigenous women. And that is also for those who exist on other parts of the gender spectrum, like not an excuse to tap out, right? Like there's an ethic and a nurturing mode of care that is central to how this movement is built, but there is a responsibility for all of us, particularly men, to show up in a way that does not take up space and undercut the leadership of women that have been building this movement that is literally about our lives and about sustaining our lives. So just really want to acknowledge that. We talk about it deeper in the show, Help This Garden Grow, wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, do we want to talk about some calls to action?
Sure, yeah. So there's kind of two central, we want this show obviously to be inspiring and moving and to be a living archive of this person who we feel is historically important. But when we get to the conversation around legacy, this is where we've watched the story be incomplete in other tellings, because this isn't just about recognizing a person. It's about listening to what they demanded their legacy to be. And so it became very clear in talking to people about what Hazel wanted to live beyond her work, what the legacy she wanted to live, that it was kind of two things. And so this is what we're, asking y'all to do to help this garden grow, is this two-pronged approach of, we mentioned this, take care of your own shoebox, do that type of relentless inquiry that Hazel did in her space, wherever you are, whether you're at, the spear tip of environmental racism or not. It's equally as important in both, whether you're living in a disinvested from community or an invested in community, having an understanding of how zoning decisions are made. Where's the water quality? Where's the air quality? What are the organizations already in my space that are asking those questions?
What are the materials being used for my home, my school, my job?
And it doesn't mean that inherently in having those answers, you'll then know how to respond to it. But asking those questions, that point of entry being that inquiry, then gives you the tools to be able to figure out, all right, now how do we organize? You can't organize towards something you don't know what you even need to be addressing. And so those methods of inquiry that Hazel brought forward, use those in your own space.
And she did it going to the library. Y'all got Google.
Yeah, no, sure. You told this great story. Those living room looked like, which was also the PCR office for many years, of just piles of books and papers and articles that were sent.
Xerox.
Yeah. No, if you can save it to the cloud, we got no excuse.
Yeah. So one, dogged inquiry.
And then two,
wherever you are, particularly for those who have institutional relationship or access, we want everybody to bring in their resources and their power to make the material legacy of Hazel Johnson a reality. And that is the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Center. And so for years now, PCR, and I'll let Cheryl talk about it more, worked to save a school building that was scheduled for demolition to be turned into a playground and bring more hazards up into the air and into people's breathing space. And so PCR saved this historic building, and Hazel had a vision, and Cheryl and the org has continued on this vision of what we need is not just to abstractly honor or remember Hazel, but to really continue the work. So we need more environmental scientists. We need more organizers. We need more policy creators. We need more farmers. We need more facilitators. We need healers. We need a space to eat and gather. And we need a museum to really go deeper in this learning and to build curriculum. And so PCR deserves to have also a bigger space to do its organizing. PCR stands for People for Community Recovery. And so Cheryl, just, you know, as we're about to get out here, anything you want to say about the possibilities and the progress of making the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Center a reality?
Yes, after all the historical research we had to do to find out who the owner of the building, was just like mind-boggling, because the school was built with federal dollars. So it was owned by the federal government, and they quick deeded to CPS, and CPS quick deeded to some. Well, anyway, we are still in the stage that now we need to fundraise, because now we need to do the environmental impact assessment of this building. So right now we're trying to raise funds to hire an environmental consultant so that we can start the negotiation with the CPS, Chicago Public School, and the Chicago Housing Authority in the acquisition of this building. So right now it's going through appraisal by the Chicago Public School System, and hopefully, if the building is valued at $25,000 or less, we can negotiate acquiring the building without it having to go out to public bid to get three successful bids to bid on the building if it's more than $25,000. So that's where we at the latest point, but we're trying to assemble our team. We know that the first phase that we have to have is an environmental consultant on our team, and to do the environmental assessment phase 1 of it. So we're trying to raise the fund to be able to hire this firm to come on board to begin that process. So that's where so now it's about, because while Altgeld is known as historical now, so there's a lot of historical incentive that is associated, that once we get acquisition of the building, we can apply for those things. But I just wanted to add that this building will serve as an environmental open, as my mother used to call it, an open environmental lab, where she's bringing government, community, and business and together to come up with remediation plans, because we're trying to create what we call an environmental remediation workforce. It's allowing to clean this stuff up, so also it's going to include it in this building is a lab to do the testing, and to teach our kids how to be lead science, to do laboratory work. So, even having the conversation what the water reclamation district would believe in, and teaching our kids how to purify our water, clean our water through their system. What would that mock water lab would look like? Because we have to, this is our life. We always got to have that continued process to be able to learn how to remediate and clean up our environment. And that's the goal of this building, and to bring those stakeholders together along with the community, because the community has the right to be the first to learn how to remediate and clean up their neighborhood.
That's beautiful. So in being mindful of time, I think we'll leave it there. So just as a takeaway in that, I heard being in the process of fundraising around being able to hire an environmental consultant. And so just doing some power mapping in the chat, if y'all have relationships around potential funding sources, consultants who could be interested in that, that would be a great connection to make. You can contact People for Community Recovery through their website. Also, if you want to support the work of PCR, On April 22nd, there's a highway cleanup. The space, the 130th Street leading to the gardens is been named Hazel Johnson EJ Way. And if you want to come help clean that up, hit up Adela, ADELLA at pcrshi.org, or check out their website, peopleforcommunityrecovery.org. And yeah, I hope we all take those twin calls to action to help bring this Environmental Justice Center to existence, and to ask the questions and help the gardens around us in our spaces grow. Because the only way that we can grow the things we need is to look toward the pathways for that repair.
Just really want to thank you, Cheryl. I want to thank Hazel. Y'all's contribution to the world and to our city and communities has been revolutionary. And for everybody who is here, who's present, one more call to action. Go listen and help this garden grow everywhere you get the podcast. If you want to learn more about the story, some of the questions in the chat that we unfortunately didn't have the time to get through in depth are actually wrestled with there. So it's a 6-part series that really goes in depth and goes into some of the nuances of this legacy. So thank y'all so much for being here. Thank y'all for having us at this amazing symposium that y'all are holding, and much love.
Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, everybody. This concludes